So you get all those problems actually going to hit people, particularly people on benefits. How are you going to fight that? It has to be on the basis of saying that Michael hinted at it there, but they're going to fight the cuts all the way. I mean, if you get into this argument about, oh, why don't they cut health instead of education? And somebody else, and our crazy political system here encourages this to happen. Somebody else will phone up and they phone in and say, oh, no, health's far more important. So let's ring fence the spending in health and cut elsewhere. Once we get into the argument about where the axe should fall, we've lost the argument. Because all they can do in the end is sort of arguing about how deep it should go in to working class people's lives and incomes and so forth. And if we're going to fight in, very briefly, the money is there. It is a simple, straightforward, deliberate lie when they say, well, the money just isn't there. We can't afford it. It has to be cut somewhere. The deficit's growing and we're living beyond our means, and the Labour Party bequeathed us this huge debt. All lies. Every bit of it is lies. You know, because there is at the very least, £100 billion outstanding in uncollected taxes. Now, people know sort of more so than previously about people like Vodafone, which was excused £6 billion taxes by the head of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, who happens to be an ex-employee of Vodafone. And he just signed a bit of paper saying, no problem, no debts to pay, £6 billion. Topshop, Boots the chemist. Boots the chemist, you might think its headquarters in London or somewhere like that. No. Boots the chemist has got its headquarters in Zog. Now, I bet you not many people know where Zog is. I mean, it's not a planet in a distant galaxy. I didn't know where Zog was until a couple of weeks back, and I spotted this and looked it up sort of on Google up Zog. Where the fuck's that? Zog turns out to be the smallest canton. Switzerland's the very canton. It's the smallest of them. It's only 200 square miles, far smaller than Tyrone. It's this wee canton, and it offers more secrecy and better tax advantages than any other canton in Switzerland. And all you have to do is register your company there. But as far as the law is concerned, it's a Zog company, and not a British company at all. And the Zog operation consists of one employee sitting in an office, the second story up, and there's a brass plate down below that says Boots the chemist. That's it. Fraud. Total fraud. You don't pay tax on it. You spend their Boots and Saran. It is. You go in there and buy, it's all profitable stuff that they're for goods. No tax. Whereas you try to get away with not paying tax. You'll punish up in the court for it all. Add all that up together. Then there's uncollected tax. Then there's tax that are evaded, through people squirreling it away, and the Cayman Islands and the rest of it, and the scams. That's only tax avoidance, the Boots thing. Perfectly legal. Boots and Vodafone and all that. They're perfectly legal. They don't have to hide it. Then there's the illegal people here, send it off their ill-gotten gains and so forth. And then there's money which simply goes uncollected. Add the three together. So Richard Murphy, who's one of the foremost tax experts in these islands, produced a thing for the British PwC, trying to give an estimate, and he came up with 123 billion. 123 billion or more than pay for all the cuts. England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So it's a lie to say that the money isn't there. Now the point is, if I'm making sort of a finish of this, in order to get that onto the political agenda, you can shout all you like about it, but it's immoral and it's unfair, and so it is. The Tories across the water are not going to pay any attention to you. The one thing that will make them pay attention is a mass movement of angry working class people. But the trade union movement would have to be at the centre of. I'm not suggesting, really not suggesting, this is not code language for saying let's go out and burn the town down. Of course, it's not. You alienate an awful lot of people. If you try that, and as an argument for the organisation both of the employed and unemployed workers, you start making radical demands and to put pressure on politicians, including politicians of Stormont, to say stop passing on these cuts. Do what you did in relation to policing and justice, where they said they would pull the whole institutions down on a whole number of occasions, over decommissioning, over disbandment, over the 800 million quid that they needed for policing and justice. They were banging the table. When have you ever heard them saying, we'll pull the institutions down if you don't withdraw the cuts, benefit payments to those vulnerable people in our society? And I'm in a way, I understand why they won't do that. Because the conditions that would make it possible and probable that they would do that, again, would be masses of people on the street that they depend on. You have masses of people, if you had rallies not of 200 people, you know, but of 10,000 people, sort of in places like Strabane and so on. And that's going to take a while to do that. It's going to take sort of fighting wee small battles. It's going to take sort of putting out, answering the propaganda that's coming from the other side. It's going to take people don't have the it's not patronising the people. It's saying that people only get the confidence to move out when they see lots of other people doing it. They won't come a stage. This is sort of the way these things, it's the way the civil rights movement worked, way back in the 60s. It's tiny. I'll finish on this here. There comes a stage where there's a sufficient number of people, a critical mass of people doing things, that everybody else starts to say, hold on, this just might work. You know, so that's the point. You'll never sort of argue people into doing things. You've got to show that with confidence they can say, we're going to join this because it might work. People put all sorts of tactics and strategies if they think it will work. Working class people are quite sensible. They're not going to support some radical strategy if it looks like it's going to be a fiasco and not work. Therein lies the importance of trade union organisation, and it seems to me, of the trade union movement putting far more emphasis on organising the unemployed or encouraging the unemployed to organising themselves. Tiny thing. They should be unemployed people represented in trades councils all over the place, and with the rallies and demonstrations and all the rest of it. There should be specific representation for unemployed people as well as for the major unions, Unison and IPSA and all the rest of it. Sorry for going on first of all.
Thank you, Emma. Brilliant, thank you, Red. And I can hand over to Tommy McKinney of the Independent Brokers Union.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Last night I was watching television and I had an option of Stormont Today or Enda Kenny Forever. So I tuned into a different programme and I saw a young man from Derry discussing a film that's been launched recently about the embezzlement of billions of dollars and pounds and everything else. And he posed a very useful question, which I thought come to the essence of it. He said, this film is very good, but it hasn't asked the question what to do. Of course, it was aimed at McCann. And that, in many ways, I believe, is the essence of what we're looking at. You know, what is to be done? What is to do? What is to be done? And what I would suggest we need to think about now, and this doesn't in any way contradict either of the former speakers, the first two speakers, but I think we have to look at what we have and what is available to us at the moment. And what I would suggest is that we've got to take another look at the organisation of labour that we have at the moment. In practice, the trade union movement that we have today arose out of a period of time when there still was a viable option known as social democracy. That the trade union movement, the TUC in general, the ICTU, what we're looking at is something that was built at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. It has been said, and rightly said, that social democracy morally lost its authority in 1914 when it opted for war, in the most part, in the First World War. But for at least 30 years after the Second World War, social democracy and all the other organisations that come about from it was able to deliver certain very positive and measurable gains to working people. The National Health Service, education, social housing, many benefits such as that. And whatever critique may have come from the left beyond social democracy, at least had to take that on board. Real material conditions over the last 30 years have reversed that trend. Thatcherism, Reaganism, neoliberalism, let's call them what they will, bundle them all together. But what we're seeing, that allied and based on the real material conditions that have been brought about by globalisation, where industry can be moved almost overnight, where certainly capital can be moved in instants, this has made qualitative change. That has in practice undermined and dumbed down whatever effectiveness there ever was, and there was, with social democracy. And with it has went also a question mark over the power to deliver of what we know as the trade union movement. Now that does not by any manner or means invalidate the need for organised labour, but what I would suggest, in fact, the need for organised labour is at least as important as ever, more important, but what it does mean in my view is that we need to look at the organisation and what we have, and is it still fit for purpose in all its aspects. And that doesn't mean to say that there are not many, many people working very hard and diligently and properly within that movement. But many of the old practices have now become, if you like, defeated. They have been contained by the powers that be, and we've got to look outside the box and the cliche to see how we cope and deal with the real material conditions we're faced with today. In terms of the unemployed, Marx once said that the wages of the 90 employed on the factory floor are set not by the 90 but by the 10 standing outside the factory gate willing to take their jobs. That's what happens with unemployment. It's used as a regulator. It's actually described by capitalist economists as a regulator. The non-inflationary rate of employment. They have a theory, they have their graphs and charts to describe that, and for that reason organised labour cannot afford to overlook the unemployed and the impact of unemployment on the terms and conditions. And as such, while there was the possibility of high employment, while it was more difficult to transfer manufacturing, remember that it's only very recently that we've introduced such things as internets, faxes, all of those devices that make the transfer of capital actually instantaneous. We're talking about 20 years ago. 20 years ago we didn't really have the internet. The fax machine was coming on board with over the last 25 years. These are the things that foreign travel, when I was 20, people of my generation and my friends, most of them didn't have a passport, none of them ever went abroad. I'd say there's hardly anybody in this room that hasn't been on a foreign holiday. It mightn't have been very expensive, but it's now taken for granted. The movement, globalisation, is not just a theory sitting out there, it's a very practical reality. So to do that, what we've got to look at, in my opinion, is the fact and the impact that this has had on organised labour. We are now looking at a situation where union density is declining alarmingly. It's declining even more alarmingly in the private sector. We are arguably approaching a situation similar to the end of the 19th century where organised labour is confined to very refined, defined, marginal sectors. The latest attack, bear in mind that under Thatcher, the attack was made on manufacturing. Now the attack, we can see it coming, you can see it written up there, the attack is being made on the public sector. It's the public sector, we're told, that has undermined competitiveness. It's the public sector that's sucking so much of the fabric and the finance out of this sector. It has to be brought down. Once that goes, and that's what they're aiming for, they're turning the clock back in terms of the class struggle, we can see a situation where organised labour will be as it is in some of those states in the United States. You know, they talk about the right to work states where organised labour practically doesn't exist. We've got to face that challenge and roll it back. And in my view, we've got to look at it in a different light. It's not, we still need the trade union movement, we still need organised labour, but we need to look at it in some way that we can bring the unemployed into this struggle. And we've got to look at it in a broader sense than simply organising those who are in employment. It's vital that we reach beyond those that are in employment. As such, the mass movement that Eamon has talked about, the mass movement that Michael has talked about, that is the essential, because nothing moves without the people. To do that, we've got to look at how to organise this. The unions that we have today, and I'm not trying to be critical, I think we've got to be analytical rather than critical. How do we bring those that are not organised any longer? We've got to look at a different system. There is a suggestion that our union has been making and working on, and we're describing it as community unionism, where we're actually using the community. We must involve the community and not just those who are in employment and in unionised employment. And in a very simple example, it's something that can be described as social justice unionism, community unionism. It doesn't really matter what term is put on it, but we've got to involve not just those who are in the union and in employment, but we've got to involve the entire community. We've got to think in terms of not just the organised labour movement, representing employed and unionised workers